Hey guys, welcome back. This is Rob from Black Label Miniatures. This week we are painting up Padme Amidala for Star Wars Legion. So after assembling and priming our miniature, we'll go ahead and get started. And we're going to start out with the skin. And for the skin, I am using just a straight beige red. Now, when you're working on faces, remember to thin your paints down pretty good so as not to destroy any details that you have. So moving on to the jumpsuit, and that's going to include her chest and her pants area along with her arms. And for this, we're going to be using a cold gray. Now, I know if you look at the picture on Padme, her outfit is basically white on white. And I feel that that's not where I wanted to go with this. I wanted to have a darker, jumpsuit color, so I decided to go with a cold gray. Now, also, I am not going to be painting the armbands right now, but I will come back and paint the armbands afterwards with a German gray. Now for the belt and boots area. For this, I'm going to be using a combination of dark sand and cold gray. The cold gray is to help tie in the cape and the jumpsuit and the pants all together. Now, do your best here not to spill over onto the pants areas, as you'll have to go back and cover this up. Now moving on to Padme's hair. For this, we are going to be using a chocolate brown. Remember when painting this to avoid the face as best as you can so as not to have to go back and cover it up. And the brown can be a little difficult to cover up with the beige red. Now moving on to the cape. For the cape, I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Color Buff. Now, I guess if you wanted to, you could use a white here instead of buff, or like an off-white, light, really light gray or whatever. I kind of like the buff, and then I don't at the same time, but it's the color I went with. Now, could the boots and the belts be the same color as this? Probably. It might help tie, the cape and the boots together, but I kind of preferred to have these colors separate, as I didn't want everything to kind of blend in together, which is what you can get when you have a miniature that's all in the exact same color. Moving on to the shading. For the shading, we're going to be using light tone for pretty much everything except for the face. And for the face, we'll be using the Flesh Wash from Army Painter. Now, remember when doing your shading, you're going to want to thin these paints down because they're a little strong straight out of the pot. Also, do your best. You want to keep an eye on these and make sure that they're not pulling up in any areas, as this can create staining, which is really hard to cover up afterwards. And also, once you put your shade down and you see that it starts to set, don't go back and mess with it, because then it will really create an issue that is almost impossible to cover up unless if you basically repaint and reshade the section. Now, after we let our shade dry for a little while, about 30 minutes or so, we'll go ahead and go back to the cape. And I'm going to start off with straight buff, and I'm going to be doing a fairly light dry brush over the entire cape area. And then once I'm done with that, I'll come in and I'll use a little bit of white mixed with the buff, and then white by itself. Now, when dry brushing, you don't want your brush to be dry and you don't want it to be wet either. You want it to be kind of in a happy medium in the middle of the two. So the best thing to do is to stick your brush to a pad that, like a sponge, like the sponge inside your wet palette if you're using a wet palette, and then take your brush and touch it to your hand or touch it to a towel or something to pull out most of the moisture. Then stick it in the paint that you want, and then try and get as much of the paint out as you can onto a paper towel. Use your hands to make sure that that there's not too much ink still left in your brush, and then lightly go over the areas that you want to color. Now back to the belt and the boots, again with dark sand and cold gray at first. Do your best when you're doing this, not to spill over into the gray areas. And we're just going to be covering, pretty much the whole area of the boots. Work your way around, highlighting it. With the belt, try and highlight just towards the top. And then once you're done with that, come back with just straight cold gray and give the top of the boots and the top of the belts, a little bit of an extreme highlight. Working on the jumpsuit, we're going to be using the original cold gray, and we're going to mix in a little bit of ghost gray, and we're going to work on highlighting all the upper areas of her jumpsuit, her legs, her upper breast area, and the tops of her arms. As usual, do your best to avoid spilling over onto the belt or the boots, and especially the cape here. I'm going to come back to the face with beige red, and then I'm going to mix in a little bit of basic skin tone. As before, remember, you're going to want to thin these colors down because the face has such small details that if you leave your paint too thick, it can obscure them. Also, do your best not to spill onto the jumpsuit, the cape, or the hair here. Now, you might notice that I tried painting her eyebrows. Now, painting eyebrows on a miniature is super hard because they're so small. The problem is Padme's hair is pulled back, which gives her a high forehead, and you kind of want to paint in eyebrows. So when you're doing this, just make sure that you're using a really thin brush with really thin paints and take your time. If you put too much down, don't be afraid. Go back over it with the previous color, the beige red and the basic skin tone to cover up what you need to. And then just reshade any areas that you feel need it. So I'm going to come back to the jumpsuit real quick, this time with just straight ghost gray, and work on her upper chest area and her arms, and maybe the top of her thighs where I felt it needed an additional highlight color given. Now, after fixing her eyebrows, I had to reshade a little bit, and I'm coming back now with straight basic skin tone, trying to clean up her nose and her upper cheekbones and right behind or right below her eyes. Now for her hair, I'll go ahead and clean her hair up again with the original chocolate brown color. Afterwards, I will mix in like a minuscule amount of moon yellow, and I mean just like the very tip of your brush with a little bit of yellow, just to bring that chocolate brown color up just a tiny amount to put in some highlights into her hair. Now before mounting our miniature on our base, we need to texture it, paint it, and add some grass. I normally glue down a couple pieces of cork for rock. I'll texture the entire base with Vallejo earth texture, paint it black, and then use 3 or 4 different shades of brown to bring it up. And in the end, I will put a thing of grass or 2 on it, and then I'll mount my miniature and seal it with matte varnish for protection. So here we go. We have Padme Amidala for Star Wars Legion by Fantasy Flight Games. If you like the videos that I make and you want to see more and help my channel grow, please consider supporting me via Patreon or PayPal, links below. Also, remember to subscribe, like, and share to get alerts when I add new content. And as always, thank you for watching, and remember, if nothing else, paint something.